Welcome to the Compost Pile, a podcast where we break down gardening, homesteading, and more. Join your hosts, David Poole and Aaron Barnhill, as they pile up information and break it down so that you can be more successful in the garden.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Compost Pile, your podcast for all things gardening. As always, our host David Poole is over here. I'm Aaron Barnhill, and today we have a special first time for this podcast. We have a special guest, right?
Yeah.
Exciting. I'm Tom Wright.
Hey, what's up, Tom Wright? How are you, man?
and I have plants.
He does have plants. I think that's probably the one requirement that you would need to come on this podcast.
Yeah, no. Too many plants, some would say.
Is there such a thing?
I feel that's most people nowadays.
Yeah. And there's a time like, early October I start regretting my life decisions about why I have so many plants because, winter is coming, right?
You just went through that, didn't you?
What are we going to do with all these plants?
And that's been an interesting journey.
That just happened for you last weekend, didn't it?
Yeah, I moved. I moved plants Saturday and Sunday because I had built a supplemental space to put them at temporary greenhouse.
Cool.
And but I start that. I have to think, when might it be a frost or a freeze, and a frost particularly. So when I'm starting it, it's 90 degrees outside, and you think there's no way, but we just had it. Here in November, we've had a frost already.
And here it comes so rapidly. You never know when the cold's coming, or even if you do, it's just crazy how it goes from hot to cold with a snap of a fingers. And it's like, man, you got to time everything just right.
Yeah, I used to be one of those people that hauled plants inside, and that was troublesome.
But then you got way more plants.
And I got way more plants, I got way more plants.
Well, if you guys couldn't tell, this episode is actually going to be about preparing for winter, overwintering plants. Right, David? What else could we...
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, since we experienced kind of like an early cold snap, and I guess technically, I would say we had our first frost. I mean, there was frost on the maybe not a complete,
not
but
a freeze.
Yeah. But
wasn't a freeze.
Not a freeze,
frost.
but, we got a first frost, so it's kind of catalyzed me into thinking about, like, what we need to do to get ready and just some good practical steps that we can take to be ready for the next cold snap, because it's coming and it could be here next week for all we know.
Yeah, and I guess, you might we have to think about, like, you have plants in the ground that you need to protect. You have container plants, and I know I lost a satsuma tree in that freeze. I think it was in 21, that Valentine's Day freeze.
Which is BS, because satsumas are supposed to be a little bit more frost resistant than other citrus.
Didn't make it. I mean, what was it? 10 degrees something, it didn't make it.
And most of your citrus is going to be cold hardy down to like in the 20s.
Yeah.
Probably like mid 20s. And there's a couple, they have some new cultivars now that are trademarked. There is one of the three citrus growers is in Orange, Texas. Saxon and Becknell, and they have the Arctic
Saxon
Frost.
and Becknell is in Orange?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
They're originally from Louisiana, but they have a nursery there, and they also have one here in Orange.
It's called Arctic Frost.
Arctic Frost is the specific variety, and there's Orange Frost, and those trademark varieties have a slight edge on cold tolerance versus other satsumas.
Those plants produce glycol in there. I'm just playing. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, so it's cultivar selection is important in citrus now, especially because we keep getting these, I don't want to say unprecedented, but we keep getting these like extreme cold snaps, and they're becoming more and more consistent. Whereas, used to, I felt like we would see these kinds of weather less frequently, or over, maybe every 5 to 7 years, we would see something like really cold, but now it's just seems to be all the time.
I think it's interesting because, I don't have it plotted on a graph, but there's probably, periods where we go through longer periods where we don't have something that's that severe. Because I think of, like, when I mentioned satsumas, in Silsbee, they had satsuma groves and people produced them commercially. Yeah. And then you had this big freeze, wiped out the whole industry. So, something to consider when you're putting plants out there and what you're going to do and what's going to survive.
I think, it just kind of brings you back to like fundamentals. If you're going to put something in the ground or grow anything at home, you got to have a plan. Like, most people just plant and go and don't really have any sort of idea of what they're going to do when these things come, or they just don't even know that they need to have that plan.
Yeah, that's honestly, that's one reason why I haven't planted any of my citrus in the ground. So I have comically large citrus plants in comically large pots. I have grapefruit. I have a Rio red grapefruit, which is pretty cold hardy,
Yeah,
right? 'Cause
fairly.
it's pretty good. It's the one that I probably bring in like last. I'll bring it in if it's going to be below 20, but even if it freezes, I'll leave that out there. But I have a improved Meyer lemon, like Meyer's Best, and then I have a Parisian lime. And I just got to break my back bringing those inside the garage, but I have to do it.
Yeah, your
I
lemon.
guess. I don't know. Do I have to? I've never tried to put a blanket or anything over them either. So.
You can definitely cover them in
Yeah.
a container, like a small citrus. You definitely can cover them, but you got to be very specific how you cover them, because a lot of mistakes people make. They just
Yeah.
drape something over the top, or they throw up a piece of plastic, and those are two ways you don't want to necessarily do it. Anytime you cover something, regardless of whether it's a fruit, a vegetable, or if it's like some of say like a hibiscus, and you can't
Yeah.
bring it in or plant it in the ground, you've got to put that frost cloth, like a sheet, an actual frost blanket. You could do like
So
tablecloths.
it's like multi-layered. Yeah.
Yeah, but it needs to be cloth, no plastic.
Got to breathe.
Yeah, you want something that can breathe, and you ideally, if you can, you don't want it laying on top of the foliage. You want it to be elevated. So some form of, on a vegetable wood, you can make like hoops and,
Okay.
and lay it over the top. When you're dealing with a tree, it might be a little bit more difficult, but you want that to be over the top, but you also want it to go all the way to the ground.
Because you're trying to hold in some of that radiant heat
because
from the ground.
that the ground is the warmest part,
Right.
and that heat, rises as we've learned all these years. So you're kind of creating a little mini greenhouse effect, and you're holding that in. And especially if we're talking about citrus, the most important part is the trunk and the actual graft. Because almost all your citrus that you purchase commercially now is grafted to a sour orange rootstock, and that's where it gets a lot of its cold hardiness. But if you
more of a wild citrus,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Let me correct. My there is still a tree out there that is producing leaves, but it's not a satsuma anymore.
and that's a real common thing. So people they thought they protected the tree, they thought it survived, it died back, and then all of a sudden they start seeing growth, and they're like, all right, it made it. But if you really go back and you look at the foliage, often it's in pairs of three. What they call trifoliate. And then also you often see even unthorned varieties of citrus will have thorns, and that's the rootstock that has still survived, and it's growing, and it could produce an orange, but it would be a very sour orange, not really edible, not something you would desire. And so that's why it's important to protect, when you have a grafted tree, making sure that you insulate it, like maybe with pipe wrap.
Mulching?
Mulching. So
Oh,
mulch,
like a fun noodle, right, from the pool.
yeah,
Ocean,
pool noodle.
yeah.
Even like regular pipe insulation. Because if you think if that can protect my pipe,
Right.
why can't it do the same thing for my tree? But most people, they're concerned with protecting the bigger portion, but really and truly, they need to be focused on that trunk. And if a lot of the foliage and the tips of the tree die back,
Yeah.
that'll be okay. It can grow that back more easily than it can a whole trunk.
Wish I'd known that 4 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, we see so many people lose them now because it's just they're not applying the prevention correctly. And I think for me, any plant, like applying the frost cloth is really important. Another old trick that we used to do with some types of larger plants, especially if we were like wanting to protect the trunk itself, is maybe take out a few stakes, maybe like a triangle pattern or a square pattern, and stake them out. And then you could take your frost blanket or even plastic that's going to be away and wrap it around. And then you could take something like I brought pine straw today. Pine straw, dry leaves, hay, and stuff it in there, because you think of like
It's insulation.
You go outside,
Yeah.
a jacket is full of insulation
Right.
essentially to protect you from the wind. So you're helping keep that wind and that wind chill off of that trunk, ideally hoping that it survives.
Is there any advantage to like watering them prior to a cold spell?
Yes. So water actually helps hold heat in longer in the soil. So you would want to water before a freeze or any kind of heavy cold time, but you want to make sure that here, because a lot of times our cold weather, the precursor to that is a lot of rain.
Right.
So if we were already saturated, we don't want to be adding any more water, because if we overwater, that's going to be
You're like drowning the
you're going to
plant.
drown
Stress,
them out.
yeah.
It's going to be
Stress,
stress.
Yeah.
So if it has been dry, then you want to water, because it's going to hold the soil temperature longer than dry soil.
That's like a heat sink, right? It's like yeah, because it takes a lot more energy to heat that water up, instead of if there was a bunch of little air bubbles and stuff that are in the soil, right? You're filling that out.
Yeah, and you mentioned mulch. Mulch is incredibly important. We've talked about this the other day about, mulch is not it's aesthetically pleasing, and that's what most people look at mulch. But mulch is
down here.
Yeah, I brought like what we would consider a higher quality mulch. I mean, it fell in my truck, so it's not all.
Yeah.
But if you dig in, there's fines in here, so it looks like particles of soil, and it's shredded.
This is right before it becomes humus, isn't it?
Yep. And so a good quality mulch will lock together, and if you apply it at the proper thickness, like 3 to 4 inches, then you're going to be locking in some of that heat and allowing the soil to stay warmer longer. And the same thing goes for mulch, even though we're talking about cold today, but in the summer it helps keep the soil cooler.
There's never a bad time to mulch.
And two, because you say, hey, should we water? Well, if we're watering, and as long as we're not oversaturated, that water is going to stay in the soil longer, because of the mulch insulation, help keep the soil longer, warmer longer. So those are incredibly important things.
So since you spent all last weekend and spent a lot of energy on kind of winterizing your house, what were some of the things that you thought of that were the most important, or the things that you need to get out of the way first?
I think I've reached a point where I have to, I had to make a better plan than what I used to have, because, it started off with, we'll cover the plant, or I'll bring it in. And there were times when we would, and I have large plants, large container plants. I mean, some of them are 8 foot, 10 foot tall. They weigh a lot. And anytime I know I move a plant, I'm risk damaging the plant. There are all kinds of
the roots that grow out of the bottom into the ground,
them tipping over, or me, all kinds of accidents. There's so many things that can happen. I know every time I move them, there's some risk of damage to them. So as I many years ago built a supplemental space. I call it the conservatory. It's a wooden structure. I have lattice on it. It has a roof, and I would cover that in plastic. And then if I needed to, add a supplemental heat source when it got really cold. And that was all fine and good. But then I got more plants, as we do. So I had to come up with an idea to build another space. And, I didn't really want to build another permanent space, because it's kind of right there in my yard. And I want that space back so as I kept thinking it through, I ended up coming up with the idea of using 3/4 inch conduit, and they make connectors that you can connect this conduit together. And so now I've done this for 3 years, and it was small the first year, a little bigger, too big last year. So I reached my Goldilocks spot, where I build out that frame with that 3/4 inch conduit. It has an angled roof, and then I have a 40 foot by 40 foot piece of greenhouse plastic that I put over it, and then they make clips that
like
you can
thick milled plastic, right?
Yeah, 6 mil. And it's pretty beat up. I'm probably gonna have to replace it, because it's just getting tears and all that. And what I found was that I end up having plants that are in there blooming in the winter, because there's it gets 90 degrees in there.
That's wild.
And without any heat. And of course, when it's really cold, I have propane top heaters that I've done electric, and I've done the propane.
It's only like dead of night, though, right? I mean, kind of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's gonna, we have had periods where it doesn't get above freezing all day. You might have 36 hours below freezing. That's rare, but definitely at night. And I also put a lot of rock and stone in there, so that all gets heated up. That ground gets heated up.
That's a cool idea. I've never thought of that.
Yeah. And water. Also try to put some water in there too. Again, it's a heat sink.
Water. Even if that water were to freeze, one of the things people don't realize, like when it begins to melt, it produces more heat than and so you're kind of have like this this thermal reaction that's happening. I've had somebody that I know, I can't remember who, they placed like 55-gallon drums of water up underneath their citrus. I don't know how effective it was in saving the citrus, but like they're like, hey, I can't pick them, I can't pull them up. They're too big to cover.
Sure.
Let's try something. So I thought that was a unique approach, but it also kind of just, you got to be willing to experiment. There's sometimes you don't have any other option.
Well, and another challenge was my plants were in I have a garden space and then another space, and where I'm going to build, where I build this, I had to move all those plants, and again, I hate moving them, but then once it's built, I move them back. And the other thing, I got into a lot of hanging plants now, and that was kind of new, so I had to think about constructing in a way that I could put those hanging plants in there as well. So there were all these kind of considerations that I'm going through as I'm designing, and there were failures. Last year we had some straight line winds hit one night, and it didn't take down the structure. It blew the plastic back, didn't take it all the way off. So it's nothing's foolproof.
There's never foolproof. You're talking about containers, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't take into consideration when they have a lot of potted plants and such. That those potted plants don't retain the heat the same as putting something in the ground.
Much less soil,
so you have to think about that too when you're collecting all these plants, and you keep getting more, and have that in the back of your mind, because they're not going to hold that heat, and they're going to be far more susceptible to the cold, and there's going to be a lot more recovery action needed after a cold spell to get that plant back into prime health and get the soil back in line.
Another thing I think about as I get larger plants and they grow and I'm repotting them, and I get into this: do I want to get a terracotta pot? Do I want to get a plastic pot? Because obviously the plastic pots are easier to move. I don't like them generally as well as a clay pot, but those are all things that kind of come into consideration, because some of these plants, I've had them a number of years. I want to have them many more. I try not to get too attached to them, but you do, because it's
absolutely.
You watch them grow.
I've got I don't know what type of cactus it is, but it's one of the tall cylindrical type, and I've had it since it was like 10 inches tall, and now it's like probably between 3 and 4 foot tall, and it's still in the same pot, and I have to carefully move it every year because it's so wobbly, and I'm like, it's just going to break off one day.
Right.
And you do get attached to them.
Yeah,
I'm really regretting a container decision I made a long time ago. I have an avocado tree that, obviously avocados are tropical, right? They're tropical fruit trees, so they do not do well in frosting at all. So every year I have to lug this thing in and out. But it outgrew its original pot. And then I found this very, very, very large tub that was like what people clean crawfish in. The type of tubs with the rope handles on the side, and it's huge and big and round.
Plastic?
It's plastic. And it works great for like 3 years, but now I guess it's had so much UV damage over the years.
It's brittle.
I went to move it like this past couple days ago, and I'm just breaking it all off, and now I'm going to plant it again, but... So it is important, right? Container choices is important for the long haul, not just what you find now.
And having the preference of wanting like pottery, or like something that's like terracotta or glazed, something a lot of people don't consider too is that not all pottery is frost resistant. So when you think about a porous material, it holds moisture in there, and
like
if
terracotta.
it's terracotta, and we do this a lot in like different, but like concrete statuary, like garden statuary. If it gets a lot of moisture in there, it'll crack. And so
because ice expands as it freezes.
So you do have to be kind of careful and pay attention to those things as well if you're leaving things out, because your pot can damage, and then you're stressing the plant out, having to repot it in a off season or a time when it's not really growing. So there's a lot of elements that in the cold.
Yeah, even if someone decides to, if they don't want to move plants inside, or if they want to make some sort of covered space, to keep to retain the heat. What do you? Let's talk a little bit about supplemental heat and ways you can do that, and what's safe and what's not safe, because you got to be careful with that stuff. You don't want to start a fire or something like that.
The most common, is incandescent lighting, like old Christmas lights. But those things become harder and harder to find, because everything is LED, and LED is not really, while it does produce some heat, it's not going to produce enough to make a difference. there's lots of different options for heat producing bulbs and fixtures, but I think it really comes down to ensuring that you're safely supplying power. You don't want extension cords running out in wet conditions. Making sure that they're not up against fabrics. Definitely not under plastics, because those plastics you're going to create a point where it's going to wilt and you're going to burn the tips of the leaves. It's just going to get so hot. You definitely want to avoid any kind of if you're covering a plant out in the yard, you don't want to get crazy and use some kind of propane heat source. That's more suited for something like you have. You have a structure and you have space for those gases to be able to move about, and they're not super contained.
I'm still a little careful when I go in there after been running it. I know that it probably got gases in there that the plants may like more than I do.
Yeah,
so.
And you got to be very precautionary. Vent things out before if you've got a structure like you have, before you really get in there and get moving around, because we all know that kind of stuff can catch up on you before you know it.
The other thing, I guess, is thinking about blocking wind. I mean, if you can put something against near your house or something to keep it out of the wind, because wind does cause, when cold, obviously the wind chill affects plants.
Yeah.
Right?
There's actually space beside my house that I'll utilize in the winter when it's going to be maybe freezing for a day, but not a sustained freeze. You know what I mean? So I don't have to bring everything into the garage. And it's to the side of my house, where it's about 5 feet from a fence to the side. So it's a corridor, and it blocks all the wind because there's only one spot, one side that's open, so it has no through wind. And there's a plug there, and I can plug up some heat lamps and shine them right there. So the wind, when it comes to cold, is probably the most important
I think it's your worst enemy here, because oftentimes that wind chill brings us over the threshold. It might not actually be freezing, but it's cold enough with that wind chill to damage a plant. So proper plant placement, especially if you're going to go back and plant citrus again, choosing south sides away from common cold winds in the winter is really important. And just having some idea of how you can block that wind. I do think plastic has its place when you're covering plants if it's used properly. We always try to stray away from it, or making sure if we're going to have to plastic something that's really delicate or more apt to get wind damage, making sure we have cloth before the plastic, but also knowing that if we go through a night where it's really, really cold, if I don't get out there in the morning and get that plastic and some of those cloths, as a non-breathable cloth off there, then I'm going to do just as much harm to that plant by leaving it on there when the sun comes out. Then I might as well just not covered it in some instances.
I think that's a really important thing what you bring up, because I know that I didn't know that plants need to really breathe that much, right? Plants don't have lungs like we do.
Yeah, but
they respirate. But
we talked about microclimates and humidity. Well, humidity is everywhere here, whether it's cold or hot, so that moisture gets trapped up under there. And while plants do like humidity, but not every plant can handle that. Just it's trapped all up under the leaves.
Yeah.
So it stresses it.
It is very interesting. Yeah. Is there any? This is going to be kind of a shift, but I was going to bring this up. Is there any plants that you feel are, let's say, made to be annuals, but actually, if you overwinter them, they're much better? A lot of people just let certain things die in the winter, but I know as someone who grows a lot of peppers that if you can keep that pepper alive throughout the winter, next year it's going to be even better.
Yeah.
I've got some 4 and 5 year peppers, but I don't know what other kind of plants that are like that.
Those are great. I mean, in the fruit world, strawberries really should be planted in the fall.
I didn't know strawberries would live longer than a year.
We have strawberries now. They're already planted. We don't have all that we're going to do for the season next year, but we've got a handful of them in there now. And when we start getting cold, we're going to bury them in pine straw, because that pine straw is porous. It lets it breathe. It's not getting moisture trapped up against it.
So the pine straw will be over whatever foliage and everything
Yep.
there is?
I'll just, you just to be able to see it in there, but pine straw is a great mulch for virtually anything. You don't see it widely used here.
So one of the things, and I'm curious if I'm correct about this, but for many years I always go looking for coastal hay, and I get a couple of bales of coastal hay, and I use that for mulching and different stuff. And what I was told a long time ago is coastal hay doesn't produce seeds, because obviously you don't want to add a bunch of grass seed to your garden area or something. Is that correct?
I can't say with surety. I mean, I've sold coastal hay most of my life, but that's not my strong suit.
I've never had it grow.
I don't
though,
even
so
know
I
what
don't.
coastal hay is.
Well, I mean,
It's a
I
type
don't know
of
if it's
Bermuda.
I don't know if it's cut before it produces seeds. Maybe that's what it is.
It's very possible.
Because it doesn't have seeds and it doesn't produce any. And I don't know if there's a different. I don't know my hays either. Like if you're feeding livestock or whatever, if there's different hays. But I know a lot of coastal hay is grown here, and I've been used it for years. And I think aesthetically it's really nice,
Yeah.
and it's real effective. I mean, it decays. It lasts more than a year sometimes. Depending on conditions. And I don't know. I just had a lot of success. I feel I've had a lot.
I like those types. For me, it's very similar to pine straw. It's because of the actual structure of the mulch material. People think, oh, there's no way that's going to do anything.
Yeah,
it does. Because you're keeping the
wind
frost
off.
It keeps the wind off. It stays in place. Pine straw. You don't see pine straw blowing everywhere when the wind's going 40 miles an hour.
Right, that's true.
So it locks into place. It's also, to me, it's a naturally occurring thing to the region. So anytime I can use something that is potentially naturally occurring in the locale, I always feel it's a better option. And I don't see any difference. You don't see a lot of people use hay because I know there's probably a lot of things out there, people like seeds and whatnot, but it's going to do the same thing as that.
Yeah, I've never had an issue with that.
Yeah.
So I mean, and someone years ago said, yeah, coastal hay doesn't have seeds, so it's fine to use them in gardening. And my experience bears that out. And it's, obviously it's a good amendment to the soil and all those kinds of things.
It's organic matter.
Yeah,
it's going to get broken down and
Yeah.
recycled back in. I'll have to try that. I mean, it's not like I don't have an abundance of coastal hay at the shop, so I'll probably do a trial on that this season. And
Is it more expensive?
it's probably cheaper than pine straw. I mean, pine straw just.
Well, pine straw is mainly free to the people around here. It's mainly a free resource,
I mean,
right?
we sell pine straw.
Yeah.
It's readily available as a purchasable item because not everybody has them around anymore.
Right.
But,
I think if I wanted some, I would just go to the Wuthering Heights Park and get
Yeah.
and just gather up trash bags full of it,
Yeah.
honestly. And the park would probably thank you for your service. I don't know, but there is one sort of a ground cover that I like to steer clear of, and it's chopped straw. And that's for the one fact that I'm doing immortal battle on a daily basis with rats in my house.
Yeah.
And for some reason, rats, they love chopped straw. So if you don't,
it's like a nest.
it's a good bedding material.
Imagine that. Yeah, it's a fantastic bedding material. I think it probably keeps them really warm. So everything pine straw does, the chopped straw probably does better. So I don't know. I don't see.
I will say that, like, if you always have people coming in, like
Yeah.
on the retail side of things, like where people are, like, they always want straw in the wintertime over hay because they read, and I don't know if there's truth to it, because it's not something that's so readily available here to get in a quantity that I would need. That people say it has better insulating qualities than say hay or pine straw. But I mean, I don't know.
It's more like it's straw is what it says it is, right? Like a straw you drink with. It has a hollow core.
Yeah.
Right. It's
traps air, right?
It traps air, and
That makes sense.
the pine needle is solid, right?
Yeah.
It's just so there's no air. There is air between the spaces, but in straw you have multiple layers of air. This is what I don't know. I don't know anything. I don't know nothing. Speaking about I don't know nothing. What is this? You brought this in, and I don't know what this is or anything about it, but it's called Freeze Miser.
Yeah, on the homesteading side of things, like, equally, we all got faucets and hoses and things whenever we're out there protecting for the wintertime. And to me, the faucet cover is like the obsolete thing for me now. After
The little
trying
styrofoam.
or always like the little bag kind that work, but you lose them, and then every single cold snap, the hardware store down the road is like selling out of.
Wait, you missed a step here. First, I have to get my hose off there.
Yeah.
I get to figure out if it's frozen on there or not.
And even before that, I just had one on the copper bib, and like I couldn't get it off, and I get the wrenches out, and then next thing I know, I'm bending the pipe in the wall,
Oh,
and I'm like,
no.
okay, we got to
No.
stop. So this thing, the Freeze Miser, was this device that I've been seeing at my trade shows for probably 10 years, and it's just one of those items like, yeah, I don't need that, and I finally bought some one year, and I tried them out 2 years ago on a whim because I couldn't find my faucet covers. I needed some. I had some of these left
And
over
you
at the
trusted
store,
it, yeah.
and I didn't really have a choice to trust it. I just, it's one of those times where I'm back in a
Desperation?
corner.
Yeah.
Well, what does it do?
So it basically is a automatic faucet dripper. So you have a thermal wax inside here and a spring, and so you screw it onto your faucet, or if you have an instance like I did a couple years back where I couldn't get the hose off, I can screw this onto up to a 100-foot hose, and I can leave it like elevated, not on the ground. And when the temperature drops below 37 degrees, it will start dripping. And then as it gets colder, it drips a little more because that wax begins to shrink and the spring opens up the valve. And then as we get out of those the cold time, get above 37, it automatically shuts off. And I know like dripping your faucet is a controversial thing, when you're dealing like with the cities and things, but I had 4 faucets. It worked on all of them. And I will never go back to covering my faucet, just because it was simple. And for me, like I always have one hose somewhere on one of those 4 that I can't get off. And I'm out there, it's freezing cold because it's the last minute. And then one thing I like about that on our common faucets that we don't use a lot, I just put them on this time of year and I leave them.
Wow.
And then,
Wow.
the only thing I do is when I know we're below 37, I'm smart enough to go out there and check and make sure, are they dripping? I'm not going to ever trust anything. I don't trust the pipe insulation.
Are they expensive?
I can't remember how much they are, but I mean,
It's heavy.
That's how you know it's expensive. It's heavy.
I can't even recall the cost on those. Probably like in the $25, $30 range. But
is
I mean,
it cheaper than a burst pipe?
Yeah.
I think it is. Yeah.
Wow, I've never even heard of these.
That's my dad. My dad told me that like. He kind of gave me that look, that dads give where he's like, I don't know about that, and he wrapped all his stuff up good and he had a burst pipe and I didn't. So,
It looks
Take
like
that,
you could,
Dad.
It looks like you could even put it on the end of a hose too. So.
I see some people who have like multi-taps on their hose bib, where you have a hose and maybe you have something else. They'll put it on one of those and drip it to keep the faucet from going. So
cool.
I'm interested.
It's a cool thing, like for anybody, not just people that are like into homesteading, but I think it's a unique investment, and it's super simple.
It's called a freeze miser.
Yeah, at the trade shows, they bring out this big old, like, basically refrigeration device, and they have one of those hooked up in there, and it's like at 0 degrees, and they show you that it's working. But I'm like, oh, okay, like, but it's super cool. I believe in them, and it's just another alternative that a lot of people don't realize are out there when you're protecting all these. That's me. That's more important than the plants.
I was just happy when I finally got to the foam covers instead of out there with rags and duct tape.
Yeah,
I'm like I felt like I was living large when I got the.
It's cool to see innovations come along.
Yeah,
but plants are important. But protecting the sources we water them from. I definitely think.
And your hose. I mean, I always detach my hoses and drain them because you don't want to leave water in them because they're gonna. Tear apart.
I'm becoming lazy, so testing the whole thing. There is one thing that we haven't talked about, which I think is important. It's about freeze recovery. So even if we protect our plants and they survive, even in situations like where you've got this structure and it's heated, when plants go through stressful times, they use up more nutrition, especially potted plants. They're going to be more apt to see stressors. So one of the things that you can do after you go through a frost or a freeze is to give those plants a dose of food, like an organic, like slow release. Like liquid's not going to be slow release, so losing my mind here.
Yeah, liquid's fast release.
Fast release. Yeah. But something like Ocean Harvest here is one that we use a lot at home. Basically, it's a fish emulsion-based fertilizer, but you got minerals, humic acids. You got a lot of things in there that can help reduce stress on that plant and kind of rejuvenate and replenish the soil from some of the things that might have gotten used up as this plant's going through this like immense stressful event. So that's something that I think a lot more people should try to look into after. A lot of times we have these things sitting around already, but we we don't think that now is the time to use them.
It's like when you're out working in the cold all day and you come in and that gumbo's pretty good.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, you know.
So it's gumbo for plants.
Yeah,
You do burn a lot more calories when it's cold. It's true.
Yeah.
Sure,
Well, that
sure.
makes sense. I mean, I just intuitively lightly fertilize occasionally during the winter months just because I'm like, surely they need, in containers or amend the soil,
Yeah.
add some compost or composted
Yeah.
manure or something like that.
Even amending the soil ahead of cold weather
Yeah.
is good because if you have a plant that is deficient in something or it's stressed already going into the cold season, then those are going to be even more susceptible
Yeah.
to damage from frost or freeze.
So I imagine that the same kind of goes for trees as well, right? Like if you have, let's say, Leland cypresses, stuff like that, things that aren't really going to be super bothered by the cold. One of the biggest difference in most of the trees and your other plants that you're trying to protect is what? It's sap, right? So these trees produce sap, which is just sugar, and that actually keeps the tree from freezing. So, I mean, we just got to come from somewhere, right? It probably takes a lot of energy for a plant to produce those things like
Yeah.
sap. So I just thought of that. Anyway, I don't know. I don't know if I'm right. I'm asking you if I'm right. I don't know.
I don't know.
Oh, well, you know what? I'm going
That-
to be really confident about it, and that's the way it is.
We talked about the citrus trees. I'm thinking of other ornamental or plants that are in the ground that I any landscaper worth their salt probably going to think about. I don't want to put stuff out here that's going to die
Yeah.
the first cold snap. But can you think of other outdoor that are in the ground that we need to that are and it depends on how cold it's going to get, right? If it's 30, maybe
most
nothing.
are like from a landscaping perspective, most of the landscape plants that are going in the ground are going to be cold tolerant. Most of the things you're putting in evergreens.
Hopefully, yeah.
But it's more of the more delicate flowering things that. But I would say most stuff is fairly cold tolerant. If you got like. One that we put in the ground a lot around here that isn't necessarily cold tolerant is a small kind of ground cover flower called Blue Days. It's a beautiful flower, and it can freeze back and come back from the root. But that's one that I would protect. But then there's others that will die back, like more like your native lantanas. They'll die back, but just by nature in the winter, and then they're going to come back anew.
Yeah.
I mean, so most of your landscape plants can handle it. Really, it's the citrus, the tropicals, like the real small, delicate like annuals that necessarily they might be able to handle the cold, but they can't handle the frost or any kind of ice sitting on top of them that I'd be more worried about.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch you don't have to worry about at all, too. Most cactuses, right? A lot of people grow cactuses, and most of those are just fine.
Most of those are fine, yeah.
Most.
I mean, not all of them. Some of them are, agaves are pretty popular in landscaping, but you've got to have cold, hardy varieties.
Right, yeah.
Because if you have the wrong species, they definitely will not survive. Because when you also think they're a soft tissue plant, they hold
Okay.
a lot of moisture in there because they're drought tolerant, and so they definitely could freeze very easily
That's true,
if it's
yeah.
not the right kind.
Yeah, and I think living here for 40 years, like I have, it's we have that all that variation because you get those cold snaps. It
Yeah.
might get pretty cold, and then 2 weeks later, as we talked about earlier, it's 90 degrees again or something
And
like that.
all those things lead to just stress, and it's no
Yeah.
different from us. We get stressed when we get sick when the weather goes up and down and up and down. Plants get stressed, and then they're more susceptible to disease, just dieback, all kinds of different conditions, pests.
Yeah.
They all come from the same things that affect us. It's kind
But
of
the great
interesting.
thing is, for the most of the year, we have a long growing season
Yeah.
here. You can get
Yeah.
through the bad
I mean,
times.
we theoretically don't have a winter. We just
Right,
get
right.
like very short snips of what would be a winter. So
Yeah.
we kind of are in a great place for growing virtually anything.
Yeah.
That makes kind of a problem for some trees and plants that need to have a frost at certain times. Like that's why, like we can't grow apples here.
You
know?
can grow apples
well,
here,
like
but
an
it's all,
Israeli apple. But
yeah, but it's all about having the right varieties. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
cold is important. We were talking last week about just like onions.
Yeah,
How growing onions are based upon daylight and cool temperatures. So a lot of these things. Because we have such mild winters, it does affect what we're able to grow, and we don't have as wide of a selection as other areas.
So important question here. You surprised me earlier when you said that really the time to to plant strawberries is now. kind of actually blew my mind. What are some of the other plants that we should be aware is getting time to plant them? Like some of your late fall, middle of winter, or even like pre-spring plants.
Really, I mean, you're getting to the time where there's, really October, November. October's always what's listed as like the best time to plant trees and shrubs because even things that are going dormant, they're not putting on foliage.
I wouldn't have thought that at all.
They're growing roots, and that's what you want. You want establishment, not necessarily focused on growth. So October's a great time to plant most anything. Obviously, we're past that, but if you look at the weather patterns, a lot of times November is very, very similar to October, and there's not a lot of cold. Usually we didn't get this cold snap that we had already.
Yeah.
So we typically will plant all the way into November, sometimes even to early December, depending on what we're planting, if it's just like a standard landscape plant. But you could plant, coming up, it's time to do onions.
Okay, onions, so like all alliums, like garlic onions, sweet onions.
They grow when it's cool and the days are short. So next week is actually the first week that onions will be available from the Texas grower. So we get our onion stock in for next week, and then
I'm gonna get some.
Your sweet peas, like edible pod, green peas, they like cooler temps, unlike other peas. And then when we get into January, February, plenty of time away, but it's time for potatoes. So those are the mainstays that will do well in the cold. And if you got things that are already well established this time of year, a lot of it, like your peppers, they'll make it just fine. As long as they don't get hit by a hard freeze.
I think that might be the thing I do because as we leave the summer and we're like dead middle of fall, and everything in my raised bed gardens are kind of just withering, they're petering out. It might be time just to cut that down and just put onions in there.
Yeah,
it sounds like, or potatoes.
Yep.
Yeah.
We kind of split it up, and we'll separate them out in different beds so that we have room to bring in early spring crops, because I plant my tomatoes like crazy early, like February.
You're a risk taker, I can see.
I've
done it.
That's the difference between getting them or not in my world.
I've done it, and
I planted them on February 15th this year.
Yeah.
Actually, February 15th on one and February 6th on another, and I made it through both frosts and freezes. And
so you had
bumper
young
crops.
tomato plants out there.
Yep.
And we had a frost. What did you just go out and water them in the morning, or
I watered them in the morning.
Yep.
I'd already built
the foliage, right? You got to get the frost off of it.
And I didn't have any frost on them
Okay.
because I built a PVC structure and I had it wrapped up underneath in the
So
bed.
you protected them.
I protected them, and I had a few burnt leaves, but plants that were this tall, and I had some that were even larger. I think I lost one plant out of 8 at the office garden, and the ones at home, we were lucky to have natural frost protection from the oak canopy.
Yeah.
So we don't really get frost in the garden. It'll be everywhere else but in the garden. So we're lucky there. I didn't have any issues there. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, you beat the heat and you beat the bugs when you plant them early.
Yeah, that's why we do it.
It's a risk, but you can always replant, right?
That's the way I look at it. There's still time. If not, I'll be with everybody else. So
excellent.
Yeah,
excellent plan.
Yeah, before we leave, before we sign off, Tom, do you have any sage advice or wisdom?
Yeah, don't get a bunch of plants because you're going to have to deal with them.
Maybe.
That would be my advice. But you're going to do it anyway, right? If you once you start, it's a thing. It's just like people ask, "What'd you do this weekend?" I said, "Plant stuff." They're like, "Oh, never mind. You don't understand."
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, man, it's fun.
Appreciate it, Tom.
Yeah, enjoy it.
It's always fun talking plants.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys next time.